There is there's kind of a two steps forward, one step back with the legal stuff concerning this new administration. They're blocked by one judge on disbursement of funds associated with USAID, and then they're given the green light by another judge or by another judgment. And then the original judge says, no, I need you to disperse those funds the way I told you to disperse those funds. And then I'm in other conversations with people hearing, yeah, but it's all going to go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court's going to decide. Will you just give me the framework that we can put many of these legal judgments in?
Well, I think that the courts have actually done a very good job of standing up for the rule of law and trying to interpret the Constitution and these statutes well. Trump made it as difficult as he could for the courts by this shock and awe campaign. So many things were happening. Now there have been over 80 different lawsuits, I think, just in the federal courts, trying to stop these precipitate actions that Trump and Musk took. And for the most part, the courts, as I say, have ruled against Trump. Trump's been loser, 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 but he's done so many things that, yes, it's easy to focus on the 3 or 4 that haven't gone that badly for the new administration and not focus on the 60 or 70 that have gone poorly. One of the most interesting ones, Mark, is the one that just went up to the Supreme Court, and we talked about it last week. My prediction was that the U.S. Supreme Court would not take the case on the merits. And I still think that the U.S. Supreme Court may not take the case on the merits. But this is the one that involves USAID. And that's the one where a U.S. district judge, the trial court level, said that you have to restore these funds and you have to do it promptly. And the administration didn't do it promptly. So the plaintiffs made another motion, Mark, that said they should be held in contempt, these people in the Trump administration who are not following your order, Judge. And the judge said, well, what have you done to follow my order? What funds have you unfrozen for USAID? And the government lawyer's answer was basically, well, nothing. Well, the judge wasn't happy to hear nothing, but they had this explanation that they were basically canceling these contracts. They shouldn't have to pay anything on canceled contracts. They were going to delete whole parts of USAID. And basically, they had a whole different story for the judge. But the bottom line was they hadn't done anything to comply with the order. And so the judge says you have to comply by, I think it was last night. And so the Trump administration ran to the U.S. Supreme Court and asked for an emergency administrative stay, saying don't let that judge's order go into effect, so that we're basically going to be in contempt at midnight because we still haven't complied with the judge's order. And now here it is. We're going to turn back. Cinderella's about to hit midnight, and it's not going to be good because we're going to be in contempt. Chief Justice Roberts saved them from being in contempt late last night by granting the administrative stay. Now, whether he believes that that's just there's more irreparable harm from having this disaster of having all these people held in contempt, and so what does it matter if it's 2 or 3 more days? But I don't really agree with Chief Justice Roberts for giving them 2 or 3 more days, because I thought the irreparable harm was very clearly on the side of cutting off this money. These people are stranded abroad. Some of them are stranded in place in these third world countries where they've been doing such noble work, helping the local population get medicine, get food. Some of the food is rotting. The medicine is going to waste. The warlords are stealing. If they're talking about saving money, they just frittered away. Musk and Trump, they just frittered away millions and millions of dollars by letting this stuff go to waste. So I thought that Chief Justice Roberts got it wrong. But what he ruled is now the plaintiffs have to reply by Friday to this emergency request of the Trump administration. And hopefully this will be decided Monday or Tuesday, maybe even over the weekend, with, I hope, the entire Supreme Court, or at least 5 of them, saying, this is not a case that we need to decide on the merits this quickly. We're going to let the judge's order go into effect, and you guys have to release the money right away. And then, in the course of proper arguments with due deliberation, we'll decide on the legality of it. By the way, they not only have irreparable harm on their side, the plaintiffs against Trump, but I think they have the merits on their side because Congress allocates money. Congress has the power of the purse. And the idea that Trump can just turn off the faucet, that is not our separation of powers. That is not how our government was set up. So And so the ruling in the case was you had no right to turn it off. You need to turn it back on. That's what the administration hasn't done. They haven't turned it back on. I'm hoping that with the ruling coming down from the U.S. Supreme Court, I hope this is just a little roadblock, a little bump in the road to getting all of those funds restored. And then the merits can be sorted out, which I think will go the way of USAID. I hope they're back up and functioning. And that'll be the way that it is, because the president, Mark, does not have power to cut off or impound funds that have already been allocated.
Just as an aside, I mean, USAID really is the soft power that the U.S. has. I mean, to influence communities, to have a presence in communities and in countries all around the world, and to do some real good. I'm not saying every single dollar spent through USAID is a program that you might necessarily agree with, but the truth is, as a whole, it is the way in which you can influence policy and even influence thinking without having to get into a hot war about it, you know.
And Mark, just one thing: there actually does not seem to be, on the face of it, much fraud, waste, or abuse there. You can imagine in some huge things like the Pentagon and the education department. Sure, there's probably a lot of fraud and waste, very hard to find. If it were easy to find, the inspectors general would have found it. The chance of finding it now are much lower because the administration has gotten rid of the inspectors general.
If you were really serious about weeding out fraud, waste, and abuse, you'd have the inspector generals in place. That's what they're there for.
This is a complete charade. This is a complete charade trying to generate money with chaos for an enormous trillion-dollar tax break for the very richest people and the huge corporations. It's obvious, it's patent what they're doing. But there's no reason to think USAID wastes a lot of money. They've admitted that they have to pay, in some instances, money to warlords because they won't let them in to give HIV treatments. They won't let them in to feed people unless, there's the warlord with his hand out. And they document, we had to grease this guy's palm with $20,000. There's no indication that anybody at USAID greased their own palm. So, and of course, on top of that, this is yet another agency that Musk is mad at, because they did an investigation of Musk. It's like the Agriculture Department. It's like some of these other departments. And it's a revenge tour by Musk, who, by the way, seems to be, I always call Trump the biggest loser. They lost more money lost more money in business, supposedly, than anyone else, with the huge tax write-off that he took, because he supposedly lost whatever it was, $100 billion, some enormous sum that he then carried forward, and so he could not pay taxes year after year. That's why he didn't want to turn over his tax records, among other things. But the crown now belongs, biggest loser, to Elon Musk, who's lost over $100 billion. Mark, $100 billion. You want to get close to a person who's hated by so many people, who repulses so many people like Trump? Guess what? People are going to have that same revulsion toward you. And unfortunately, although you have a beautiful car, toward the Tesla, the stock is tubing. Nobody wants to buy the stock. And Musk has lost over $100 billion. And let me ask you this question. What do we really need to go to Mars for? Why are we paying all of this money for SpaceX? Who wants to go to Mars? Who wants to do this? Why are we subsidizing this? The New York Times did a study of Musk. Musk is the biggest mooch. He's the biggest federal dollar mooch. It's tens of millions. I think it's hundreds of millions, hundreds of billions. The numbers are so big, they have B's in them, all of them. Hundreds of billions of dollars that Musk has gotten from the government. Remember the welfare queen under Reagan? He's the biggest welfare queen of them all, Musk.
That's right. He is. There's no question about that. And there are even more ways in which they're engineering bigger amounts of money, bigger government contracts to Elon Musk, even as he's taking a sledgehammer to government across the board. You've said a lot. I'd love to comment on a couple of things, but what I will say is that USAID is an infinitesimally small amount of money that's spent. If you were to eliminate that entire agency, which is what they want to do, it makes no difference. It wouldn't push the bottom line at all to what they want for their tax cuts. It would be a rounding error. So the reason they're going after USAID, as David Katz has so clearly articulated, is because, and I love that you said it, it's a revenge tour. USAID was going after Musk because he turned off Starlink in the Ukraine-Russia confrontation. It's that simple. He's going after FAA because they were fining him for a bunch of things and violations related to SpaceX. He's going after the IRS and the specific people associated with the IRS lawsuits associated with Elon Musk because of that. The revenge tour moniker that you have offered is perfect for what's happening. If they were really serious about waste and abuse and fraud, you go across the Potomac to the Pentagon. That's where it's happening. And these guys who are so serious about cutting the budget and decapitating government, they've actually given the Pentagon a $100 billion increase in the new budget, the budget that just passed the House. That instead of cutting that Pentagon, that bloated Pentagon budget, they've actually increased it. It's a shame. It's a literal shame. And if these people were capable of shame, they should feel it as a result of this.
And meanwhile, Mark, they are cutting Medicaid. After Trump promised that he wouldn't cut Medicaid, he went around all of those people who get Medicaid or have relatives who get Medicaid who voted for Trump. They were all lied to. It's like, oh, did I lie to you again? Yes, Trump, lied to you again about Medicaid. And of course, Medicaid, I'm not getting all weepy or sentimental about it, but Medicaid helps so many people in desperate straits to get medicine, to get some level of care. And in all of these red states, they're not willing to throw in, even though the feds will throw in 80% of the money, they won't tax themselves in these red states 20% to give Medicaid benefits to the poor. And now the proposal in the new bill in Congress, in the House, that barely passed just the other day, is to cut back the federal contribution. Well, what that means, if the red states wouldn't spend 20% their money to get these benefits to their citizens in the red states, now that the feds are putting in, let's say, not 80%, but 75%, so that the red states will have to throw in 25%. If they wouldn't throw in 20% of the money, they're certainly not going to throw in 25% of the money. And so care for the poor, and these are so many people. You remember reading about how a lot of African Americans ended up voting for Trump? Well, there's more African Americans just statistically in the pool of people who get Medicaid. So again, from one side, the Hispanics, oh, they were breaking for Trump. Well, now their hearts are breaking and their budgets are breaking because a lot of them and their families received Medicaid. It's just terrible how this demagogue has managed to do this. And this is, of
He's
course,
demagogued his way in.
Right-wing demagogues have always done it, hurting the people that they get emotionally involved to support them, and then hurting them terribly economically and in other ways. They're very supporters who got lulled into voting for them.
Randy says Speaker Johnson was saying yesterday that Medicaid cuts are going to come from finding fraud. It's not real cuts, according to Johnson. Well, that's ridiculous. And of course, they're going to say that, just like they're saying now that discharging a bunch of federal workers is because there is a waste to all of these extra people. So then they have to call a bunch back because they're involved with everything from maintaining the national parks to the nuclear arsenal. I mean, these guys will always tell you that it's waste, and they're never going to say, yeah, we have to cut into Medicaid because we're trying to make room for our tax cut. I mean, so of course he says that the cuts come from finding fraud. It's utterly ridiculous.
Mark, it's health care, it's food, it's all the things that poor people need. Medicaid is for poorer people. Medicare is for older people. The reason they're going after Medicaid is, again, political cowardice, because they dare not go after Medicare. Medicare is the older people, and they vote a lot. Medicaid tends to be poorer people who don't manage to get to the polls in the same percentage. And so you want to pick on the truly powerless. Start with immigrants, go to probationary employees, go to poor Medicaid recipients.
Now let me get you to
the world's richest people. The world's richest people clobbering the world's most unfortunate. It's so revolting.
Yeah, revolting is the right word. I want to ask you though about the legality of what they're doing, because the discharge of so many government employees, they're going after these probationary employees, as everybody knows by now, those who they can get rid of, like on a moment's notice, who don't have contracts and unions that would protect them. But there are a number of lawsuits now associated with the discharge en masse of so many of these employees, both the ways they've done it, their ability to do it. And now I want to ask you about the legality of this. How does this all play out legally?
Well, the probationary employees are probably fairly easy to get rid of. Now, the reality is that a lot of the probationary employees are doing a wonderful job, and they have performance evaluations just like everyone else, and they have no marks on their record. They're doing an excellent job. many of them will sue, but they have lesser due process rights. And so the government, the Trump administration feels like there'll be easier cases. And
There's
also
not a
because,
there's not a wrongful termination kind of thing based on the fact
sure,
that they've
oh,
had
sure,
they've had
sure,
positive
they could
reviews,
do that, but
employment reviews.
it's much more discretionary with the officials getting rid of a probationary employee because they're on probation.
Okay.
There's just a lesser showing that has to be made, and this is all about the aggregate. Many of these people will sue to get their jobs back, but let's say they get rid of 10%, or they get rid of 5 or 6% of the workforce because they gave them that buyout, and the buyout was apparently affirmed by the courts, at least until they cheat them. Once they cheat them, they'll go to court and say, hey, you promised me 7 months of pay in exchange for my accepting the buyout. And now you're demanding that I go into office, or you're demanding something else, or you're saying I didn't really qualify. Those people will probably sue. But in the aggregate, Mark, a lot of people don't sue. A lot of people take their lumps. Also, a lot of people are not covered by unions. This idea that everybody in the federal government has a union that protects them. I'll give you one example. Assistant U.S. attorneys don't have a union that protects them. The FBI, I think, has an FBI Agents Association, but I don't think that the FBI is unionized. I could be wrong on that score. Anyway, many people are not unionized. And then you have to go, if you don't have a union, especially to speak up for, you have to hire a lawyer. A lot of people will figure, the economy is pretty good in some places. It's pretty good in California. If you get a notice from them that you're out of your job here, and you're a terrific, person, you're in science, you're in any kind of thing that's in demand, who needs to be berated by the federal government and jerked around? Just go to work for a state agency. They may even pay more in some of the blue states like California and New York, or just go into, private work, which probably pays more. Although the economy in general, Mark, is taking a hit because people are thinking, wow, all these federal employees are losing their jobs, even if they're not sympathetic, because the right wing has made so much propaganda like Fox against federal workers. You think they were all a bunch of bums, when just the opposite is true. There's so many dedicated people in the government. People will see that, unfortunately. They'll learn it the hard way, Mark, when they see all the government services that they rely on and expect to get, and they're going to be diminished or not available. And then people are going to say, oh my God, we really did need all those federal workers. But even if you don't like federal workers as sort of an emotional reaction from watching Fox all those years, you're going to think to yourself, wait a second, my own job may depend on a federal contract. Don't we have half of our business from some federal contract? Because what they've done, Mark, is they've invalidated a lot of federal contracts. That's what they did with USAID. They simply said there's 10,000 contracts that we made to go feed these people, to go give preventive medication to those people, to do this other wonderful thing. We're canceling all those contracts. And let me mention one other thing.
And I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped. And please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.